I'm Renee.
And I'm Anthony, and we are the voices, healers, and channelers behind Blue Soul Earth. We connect to higher levels of consciousness to bring forth divine energies, to heal and to teach ancient wisdom.
These energies that we access from higher dimensions largely consist of the ascended masters that humanity across cultures knows really well. They are many, but they speak collectively as one voice. And for simplicity's sake, we call them our spirit team.
How we channel as a couple is very unique. The energies we channel come down through Renee's crown chakra, through her solar plexus, into my solar plexus, and then back up through my crown chakra, and it forms a three-dimensional triangle. That's used to heal and to teach.
These energies flow through us a bit like an infinity 8. The symbolism behind why and how this happens is actually pretty profound.
It's actually accessing divine feminine and divine masculine energies, weaving them together to form one energy to heal and to teach.
We will be channeling different topics in roughly 10 to 15 minute segments that will be part of our Blue Soul Wisdom series.
So if you're just starting out on your spiritual journey,
or if you'd like to access higher levels of consciousness,
or you'd like to take your healing practice to the next level,
then join us.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Renee. And we're here today to talk about consciousness. Where is consciousness? Where does it reside? Is it in the brain? Is it outside of the brain? Is it outside of time and space as we know it?
That's a good question.
The answers are all there in the cloud, if you will, that we all have access to. Humanity all has access to these higher dimensions. So let's chat about that, shall we?
Okay, let's see what our spirit guides have to say.
As Anthony begins to connect to our guides, I wanted to take this moment to read a few excerpts from Mark Gober's book, An End to Upside Down Thinking. One of the things that I really love about his book is that he brings in well-known philosophers and scientists from around the world and quotes them on dispelling the myth that the brain produces consciousness and the implications for everyday life. If you consider this, if consciousness, in fact, survives the death of the physical body, and if consciousness doesn't exist in the brain, then how would that change people's view of death and life itself? We have so much fear over death, but imagine if we could tap into that consciousness and we become that consciousness on a spiritual level after death of the physical body, then in fact, what is death really? What is life really? Is what we're living now just a projection? Is what we're living now not real? I wanted to just read something from Mark's book. Let's assume that consciousness is in fact the source of everything. Then where does consciousness come from? This is a natural question, Mark writes, but perhaps it's a little misguided. It is predicated on the common sense belief of the limited human mind that something must cause something else. Is that true? If consciousness is in fact fundamental, maybe it simply exists beyond space and time, without anything acting as the cause for it to be. It just is. The notion that something needs to come from something else in order to exist might just be an assumption of the inherently limited human mind. Causality appears to be true in most localized events that we see and experience, but what we see and experience is extremely limited relative to the whole. An end to upside down thinking.
Upside down, inside out. We can talk about that later. But in the meantime, first of all, it is always an honor and privilege to be in your presence.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. We love talking about consciousness. It's one of our favorite topics. A lot of people don't really understand what consciousness is.
We only know it is. It is what it is, isn't it? I am who I am, is it not? So you wish to understand consciousness. You want to know, does it come from the brain? No, not really. But your brain is an organ that allows yourself to connect to it, if you will.
So our brain has access to it, but so does our spirit. So does our soul have access to it.
That is correct.
Which means that you can access that consciousness in our spirit body after the physical body dies.
That is correct. You don't need to have a physical body or a brain to be able to access and be connected to universal consciousness. It just is. So if you want to know, where does universal consciousness come from? Or first of all, where does consciousness come from? Well, it certainly does not come from your brain. However, your brain does allow you to connect to it. But when the body dies, the soul connects to consciousness as well. And that consciousness is more of a universal consciousness, God source consciousness. You have the choice, free will, to connect to it or be further from it, if you know what we mean. We often say that you can be close to the light or further from the light. You can choose the experience you want to have in this body or in your spirit body. You choose.
Well, there's also consciousness in multiple realities too. So, for example, in a quantum world, if we were to look at us, we exist in multiple realities, multiple dimensions. Is it not possible that we can access the consciousness in other realities and other timelines?
We will tell you this. When this body is gone, or even now that the body is here, you still have the ability to access other timelines if you choose. You could say the other yous. You can access the other timelines of when you were something different. Now, when this body dies, you can still access all the timelines you want. It's up to you. You decide on what it is that you want and which consciousness you desire to be. When you incarnate in a body, you are literally having a new consciousness, a new experience that you give to your consciousness and all the consciousness. That's all. That's really all it is.
When people have that deja vu moment where they feel like they know someone and they've never met before, and a lot of times people will think, well, I must have known them in a past life. Is that almost an overlap of consciousness coming together and connecting?
Of course it is. Yes, it is. It is consciousness coming very close together and starting to come together and then splitting apart again. These are the things you call timelines. Sometimes they come very close together and then they just run parallel with each other. But when they come close together and they diverge, and sometimes they will cross each other, that is when you're having that deja vu moment. That is when you are saying, I've been here before. I've seen this before. I know this person, but how? Because you have done this before, but you've done it just a little bit differently. That is why when we are with you and we are with other of your students and we start to help them see themselves, we can access their multiple timelines and tell them what the greatest probability is in this timeline for them.
So when you're accessing different timelines and you're connecting with a particular person that you feel connected to and you don't know quite why, and you say there's just a slight variance between your experience with them and another timeline. Does that mean they have the same name, they have the same sex, or what does that actually look like in a linear world? Anthony's always in multiple dimensions at the same time. Or at least they put him in multiple dimensions at the same time.
We are showing him all of the different probabilities. And what we're showing him are like lines on a TV. They're so close together that you can't see them. So your question is, does that individual have the same name?
Well, I'm using that as an example.
Yes, we know.
Does the person have a same name, same sex? I mean, what is the variance? When you say it's so little, is it that you're having the same experience with them, but in a different part of the world?
Not so much a different part of the world, but in a different dimension. That's what it's like. The variance can be so minute that it doesn't even seem like a new experience, but it is. You see, sometimes the variance can be like the hairs on your head. You can't tell one from the other, because sometimes you just want to have that experience again. So you do it over and over and over again, just a little bit different, like Groundhog Day. Do you understand?
Yes.
You have that ability to go back and to have that particular time, that particular experience, and you can enjoy it again or change it the way you want it to be. Something to learn from. It's like playing a song that you enjoy over and over again, and it gives you just a little bit of a variance, of a difference in your emotional state. That's all it is.
But if the soul chooses that, the physical mind isn't going to remember it. So as we sit here in 3D without the recollection, without the memory, and really without the access, although you say we have the access, how do we connect to that timeline?
That is another good question, but that is what another thing is that you call deja vu. Sometimes you will just be sitting here and saying to yourself, this feels very familiar, or that looks familiar to me for some reason. That's another way of saying it's just another timeline that you are experiencing again that's very, very, very close to what you're experiencing now. Now, how do you have access to it? You have to will it. You have to intend it. You have to believe it. And you have to, most importantly, practice it. You can't gain access to universal consciousness or to your own experience of consciousness without practice. And you want to know, how do you do that? Again, we're going to tell you we do not know. But we do know this. Every person, every soul has its own plan. That's why we can't tell you exactly how it is that you do it.
Because each person will access it differently.
That is correct. Each brain is different. Each person is wired a little bit differently.
Now this feels familiar to me. Not necessarily sitting on this couch, but having this kind of discussion in front of a camera feels familiar to me.
Before Anthony came here to this part of the country, we were showing him things. We were showing him things that he thought was crazy, perhaps things of the future. We were literally showing him other timelines of you and him sitting here doing this. You and him sitting in front of others and speaking and healing. These are the types of messages that are given to you all the time, but you don't listen to them. you shrug them off as being crazy, delusional, having a complex of being a superwoman or superman, and when you're healing. But in fact, you are actually doing that in a different dimension. So the reason why we were showing him this, or you have these types of visions as well, is because we want you to connect to this. These are the high frequency visions and timelines that we need you to connect to, so that you can raise the consciousness of this planet now.
Now, I didn't have this vision before today, but I'm feeling and sensing it now. So what does that play to? Is that something that there's a connection because I'm having a moment in time where you're giving me access to another timeline?
We don't give it to you. You give it to yourself. You just don't recognize it. You are actually giving to yourself this ability to connect. We want you to continue to feel this ability, to know what it is, and to recognize the subtleties of it. Because when you recognize the very small subtleties of this connection, then you can do it all the time. And that's the magic.
But if we're just projections, isn't it just tapping into another projection, another layer, another projection of what we'd like to create, like a manifestation?
We weren't going to go there, but you did, didn't you? Is there not a movie that Anthony watches over and over and over again? He always seems to watch the same movie. He wants to have a same experience, but in a different way. That's all it is also. You have to find the middle ground, the golden mean, as Buddha did. And you have to stay in that present moment. You see, it all comes back to being present, doesn't it?
It does.
And with that, we will take leave.
Thanks so much, guys. That was amazing.
It keeps getting better and better, doesn't it? We are like fine wine. Give us a little bit of air. Let us breathe. Let us connect. And enjoy the ride.
It just gets better and better.
Thank you very much. We will send Anthony forth.
Thank you. We'd love to have Anthony back.
He will step forward. We will step back.
All right. Great. So our guides are taking leave now, and Anthony will be back momentarily. This is one of our favorite discussions, is consciousness. It's complex, and yet it's not. It's one of those things that scientists have been trying to get their heads around for the longest time, and there are still so many different viewpoints on what consciousness is and how to access it.
That is so true. I can feel my consciousness coming now into a completely different realm. And sometimes it makes my head spin, but I just get used to it. And I just keep practicing it over and over and over until I can connect.
So if you'd like to find out more, Mark Gober's book is a really, really great read because it does bring in the scientific evidence for this. And it really talks about a different way of thinking about consciousness.
Thank you for joining us.
And we hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye now.